Welcome back to the science and art of open water swimming. If you've recently completed a big swim, whether that's Rotto, port to pub, a solo channel crossing, or your own personal endurance milestone, firstly, congratulations. Months of preparation, early mornings, long pool sessions, cold ocean swims, and then suddenly, it's done. And here's the question very few swimmers ask: what should you actually be doing now? Some swimmers stop completely, some jump straight back into hard training. Others start noticing shoulder tightness, fatigue, or general stiffness and wonder whether something is wrong. Today's episode is about what smart recovery actually looks like after a major open water event. I'm joined by Ryan Evernden, former Australian national finalist and founder of Formidable Strength and Conditioning, who works exclusively with swimmers across performance levels. Ryan uses structured pre and post event assessment frameworks and has developed a 2-week post event recovery approach designed to help swimmers restore tissue capacity, reduce injury risk, and transition intelligently back into training. This conversation is focused specifically on adult swimmers, particularly those navigating that often uncertain 2 or 3 week window after a long swim. If you've ever finished a major event and thought, now what? This episode is for you. Thanks for joining me, Ryan. And I'd really like just to start, if you can, give us a bit of a background about you and about the work that you're doing with swimmers at the moment.
Okay, cool. So my name's Ryan Evernden. I'm the founder and the owner of Formidable Strength and Conditioning, what is a S&C company or strength and conditioning company that has ex- pretty much only worked with swimmers for its entire existence. We've had other people in the early years and stuff like that, but my core focus has always been, working with swimmers. So for the last 10 years now, we've worked exclusively with swimmers, preparing them for events and making sure they're all sweet post event. About 4 years ago, we picked up some pool space at Betty Park. So now we also run the swim programs as well. So we're in this really unique position now where we're probably one of the only places outside of an institute of sport that has that, a fully functioning swim coaching side of things and a fully functioning strength and conditioning rehab prehab service going on in the back behind the scenes as well. So this all kind of stemmed from my early days in swimming where I was injured a lot. I'm from the country where we didn't really get a lot of the same access to strength and conditioning and all of that. So we had to do a lot of learning by ourselves, or I did, to figure out what we would do. I got injured a fair bit. So when I retired through injury, it was a lot about, okay, can I make sure that we are not having as many injuries in swimming as possible? And that was the really key thing for me. And that's kind of been the philosophy that we've embodied the entire time, the last 10 years, is if we can make sure that we minimize the injury risk for athletes in and out of the water, they're going to perform better and get better results. And it's proven to be a pretty successful formula at this stage.
I think what you're describing is very similar for a lot of people growing up in regional areas, not necessarily even having access, let alone the knowledge to know what to do. And so creating an environment where we can provide swimmers opportunities to develop all aspects is really important. Now, what I'd really like to talk to you today is your take or your perspective on what swimmers should do post big events. So, following a 10K, 20K type event where swimmers might focus on that over 6 to 12 months in terms of preparation. So, first of all, what do you typically see swimmers do in the 2 to 3 weeks after an event? And then maybe what are your suggestions that might be a better option?
Okay, so yeah, I think the way you've led with that, with like, people prepare for these events for 6 months, a year, 2 years, or these long distance endurance swims are very much bucket list swims for a lot of people. And they spend a lot of time and effort preparing for them, but then have no plan for after the swim. What to me is a bit of a missing piece in the puzzle, because the whole point of them coming to see me as an S&C provider is for me to get them in the best physical state possible, make them feel as good as possible so they can then perform at their event. But if these events that we're talking about here, when you're getting to that 20K mark plus for some of these events, there is a lot of the time we can do as much as possible and we can give them the best plan possible and their body could be the best shape it's ever been in. but things are still going to pop up over a swim of that magnitude. It is very rare for us to experience, even with our top guys like Andy and Josie and Max Coden, for them to finish one of these swims and have absolutely nothing wrong post swim. So for us, we've always had a philosophy for post swim care to be a real big priority to the point that it's built into our memberships. We don't allow people to exit our program until 2 weeks post their target event, just to make sure that they are doing the right things post event. What is very hard because you do the event and you just want to celebrate the event, and then you don't really have a lot of motivation post event to come back in the gym. But that we're breeding that into our guys early doors to make sure they come back in the gym, have a swim, do the recovery stuff that is required to make sure that they can go on to the next thing if they want to.
So, what are some of the things that you might see post event that obviously causes concern and therefore we're wanting to have this sort of 2 week window after the event to help them recover?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, so we have some obvious ones first. Obviously, shoulders are a primary concern for us, especially for these distance swims. Presenting soreness in the shoulder, any kind of lack of range of motion, any of those kind of things is something that we're really keen on first off the board. And then it's really doing a double check over any other part that we may have identified as maybe them having a slight weakness in, and double checking how that's functionally going afterwards. One of the main ones that people don't often realize is hip flexors. This is a big one that people don't do enough work on leading into and forget about post is your hip flexors, especially when you do a distance swim and especially when you put a suit on. We've found that people could do 20Ks without a suit and have no issues in their hip flexors, but they put the suit on for the big event, and all of a sudden hip flexors are pinging at the 10K mark or the 8K mark, and they're having to swim the rest of it. So hip flexors is a really big one that can then go and present into that lower back region. So realistically, we're looking at three main things there. Shoulders, first off, it's the obvious one that most people probably could have put their hand up and had a guess at. Hip flexors, what's one that often people don't understand why that blows up so massively. And the last one would be rotation, just to make sure we're getting them back to whatever rotation they had pre-swim.
Yeah, it's really interesting having worked with a lot of triathletes in the past. Hip flexors are one of those areas, spending so much time on the bike. Even though their swim then is only 3 or 4Ks, they do struggle with that post event as well.
It's only really been since the last 5 years that that's happened, and the only thing I can really put it to is the suits, because the suits are now so everyone's wearing like an arena full piece suit now for these events, and or the speedo variation. The speedo one tends to not be as bad for this, but because the arena one is so rigid, it generally has that effect because it's a lot more resistance than they're used to while they're swimming. It's fantastic. Like, I'm not saying it's either of these are bad suits. Please, Speedo and Arena, don't cut this out and use this as a marketing tool of me shitting on one of their suits or not. They're both fantastic suits, and pick the best suit that you feel best in. But we've seen it more commonly with the Arena ones. But you just got to you just got to know that prior and put the intervention in and make sure you're doing the hip flex at work in the lead in.
So, if we think then post that event, as you said, swimmers generally want to celebrate and enjoy, but what are some of the mistakes they might make directly after the event?
So I'm not going to sit here and tell you not to get on the beer straight away, because I think that when you do these events, you should celebrate. It is important to celebrate. And however you want to do that is completely up to you. But there are three major things that we get our guys to make sure that they are prioritizing straight off like as soon as they touch land. And that is rehydration protocol. So making sure they are getting not only enough water in, but they're starting to supplement hydrolyte in as well, and they're really focusing on getting at least like 2 liters in post swim over a course of a couple of hours, just sipping that down, not guzzling it down, but really making sure they're getting onto that really early straight off the bat. It's not just because of the sweat loss and all of that. It's the salt that you would have ingested throughout the swim. It's all those different things. And I know it might be very hard post swim because of how you might be feeling, very bloated and stuff like that. That's why we're saying, sip it over a couple of hours and make sure you're topping that up. The second is making sure that you're getting a solid meal into you straight off the bat. What's actually food. Don't just finish off the rest of your feeds that you had in spare. You need some actual solids to go into you. There's a lot of our guys. I know some people do have solids as they're going across, but a lot of our guys have purely like liquid feeds the entire way over, just because it's easier to consume. But you really want to make sure that you're getting something substantial into you, something with a good protein content into it, carbs, fats. Just you don't really need to be picky on this either. You just need to get something into you and have a good feed. And then the next one is ensuring that you're going to get a solid sleep of at least 8 hours. Now, for example, if you're doing an event like Roto or Port to Pub and you're celebrating until late at night, well, then you might be missing out on that sleep opportunity. But you've got to be prioritizing these things, or over the next week is making sure that you're really hitting those free things consistently over the course of the week, going through and going from there.
Wonderful. I think that's really, really good advice. I think for a lot of events, we finish, and the first thing we do is we go and catch up with friends and family, and we think the whole event's over, and we forget about how to recover. And so, even just having those three simple things can really help the athlete to put that in their planning for their whole day, as opposed to just having it finish at the finish line.
It's a pre-learned thing, right? Like it's something, we're very big in it in our program because we value it and we teach it to them after their 10Ks that they're doing and all their qualifying swims or the other events that they've done. And we're really making sure that we're hammering this home to our guys. They may not notice it, but that's kind of the secret art of what we do, is making sure they're doing stuff without us, without feeling like we're nagging them to do it. But at the end of the day, over the course of like the entire time they're working with us, we're really making sure they understand post event, we need to rehydrate, we need to refuel, and we need to prioritize some good solid sleep in those first, 12 hours post, 24 hours post, before we can even get to like what the next week or 2 weeks is going to look like for them in terms of movement, swims, all those different things before we, kind of tick the box off and say event over.
So once we've done that, then we look at the next 2 weeks. So from your perspective, rest is something that we obviously need to recover with sleep, but we're not just completely resting. So what does the next 2 weeks look like for you guys?
So it's very varied between swimmer to swimmer. Some of these guys we've had in the program, like, I mean, Josie Page has been with us for 8 years now. So her post swim recovery protocol is very refined. She knows exactly what to do. I don't need to tell her what to do. She has some specific movement stuff that she does post and all of that stuff that she's really tuned into. But for others, what we do have it in their training program like it would be scheduled as a workout. Generally, it will look very much what their pre swim warm up is. What we've found is we want to make sure it's as familiar as possible to make it as easy as possible for people to do it. The number one thing that is the problem for post swim is people actually getting to do it, not the actual what you do itself. I think that getting people to do it is way harder than giving them the perfect thing to do. It's just giving them something to do and something familiar that they know and they've done, time after time after time is really helpful in doing that. So basic mobility work where they do maybe some walkouts, some twisting movements. If we've identified that there's someone who has a lot of upper thoracic tension, they have a peanut protocol to do. So peanuts, just that double spiky ball thing that goes between your spine. Get onto that, just those key areas that they know that we've been working on prior to the event for a long period of time, just to retouch base and see how they're feeling post and continue to move. There's certain things that we do, like tell them, make sure the next day you go for a walk, you get out, you don't just lie on the couch. Go for a walk, try and go for a swim. No, it doesn't have to be miles and miles and miles or anything like that. It doesn't have to be very structured, but just doing something like rolling the shoulders over for a K is going to start that process. The main thing you don't want to do is stay stagnant. And the ways that you do that don't really matter to me too much. It's whatever feels best to you. Now, obviously, if someone's coming finished post event and they've got some serious like shoulder niggle or something's really fired up, we're obviously going to make sure that we have a chat with them and give them something that they can do that's not going to aggravate that further, because it probably just needs a full rest, and then work from there.
So getting some movement occurring that first 24 hours and whatever that movement, it's not a big deal. But at the same time, using some similarities to what they've done in the past so that it becomes more of a routine. After that sort of 24 to 48 hours, you've had a chance to talk to your athlete and you've seen whether or not there are some more serious type injuries or whether they're okay. What's happening in the next 7 to 14 days?
So kind of that initial after that initial stage where that's all kind of settled, we've got an idea of where their body's at. We're not just dealing with like a post-event soreness now. We kind of understand what's going on there. We then generally look to, we want them back in the gym. We tell them like you're not going to skip your first gym session. Do not skip your first gym session. So whatever that is, maybe a Tuesday, they come in for their session. We'll still roll them through something. They will still move some weight around, but it will be, at a very low intensity. Most of it is going to be it's going to be a higher rep range or isometrically held, depending on how they're feeling. If they've got a lot of, you know, really aggravated shoulder joints or whatever like that, we'll probably hold them in more of an isometric hold to relieve the tension on the tendons there. But if they've got no real like indicators that something more is going on there and we haven't had to refer them out, we do just like to get them moving with some maybe 60% of what they would have been doing beforehand, squats, deadlifts, RDLs, all those kind of things, just to get them moving back in those patterns, to just start moving those muscles and seeing where, if we've got any issues in range coming from that. So a big thing for me is when we start them in the program. So a lot of the post event is very much about the same as the start of the whole training program. The post event, what we're looking for is, do they have adequate range of motion? Are they able to stabilize correctly? And are their movement patterns working correctly? So we really just get them to do something that would have done just prior to the event at a very low intensity, to get them moving again in familiar patterns, to see where they are looking compared to what they were looking like before the event. Because before the event is where they're peaking, right? So that's where they're going to be at their best. What we then get them to do is, okay, well, you've done the event now. We've given you your like adequate acute, like let's say acute recovery time post, and we've now got you back into the gym, and we're wanting to see how you're now moving through those same patterns and what's coming up for you and how are we going to change from there.
So appreciating you're looking at everyone as an individual, but at what point generally do these swimmers get back into the gym? How many days after the event?
Mate, if they raced on Saturday, I'd want them in Monday, Tuesday.
So you've indicated things around mobility and doing some isometric type work. What sort of metrics are you actually using to indicate their readiness for increasing intensity or reintroducing intensity or reintroducing greater loads?
Yeah, cool. So if we get someone in, so we're very big on the VOLD systems, yes. So we use a lot of that stuff. When we get them back in post event, we obviously have a conversation with them. We understand where they are at, how fatigued they are based on the conversations, asking them what they're like, reading body language, seeing how they're presenting as they're walking through the door. And then we're looking at, okay, let's do an overhead range of motion test. Let's just see how your arm's looking above your head. So just arms by side and just lift it up above the head. If it's looking pretty fishy, we'll whack them on the dynamo and get an accurate comparison to their last testing to what they're at now, and go, okay, well, how much of a deficit do we have here? And we'll go through each one of those specific tests in the range of motion side of things first. So overhead range of motion, external rotation, rotation left to right. There'll be the three main ones that I'd want to get them looking at first. Then we'd be looking at, okay, where our strength markers are. If that's all clear and we've got good range of motion still, we'll then move them on to, okay, let's see where your force outputs are and how far behind are you from where you were before. So I'm very much, okay, well, let's get the range back first and we'll program for that. And then once we've got range back to what it was before, it doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be what it was at the last testing that we did. Because then we know we're back to a semi baseline. And then we go, all right, cool. Where are our strength numbers at? How is internal and external rotation looking? How's that ratio looking? Is right side presenting that it's weaker than left side post event? So we have a bit of an idea of what's going on here and how they have recovered. It also gives us a really good insight for the guys who are maybe looking to do something else down the line, of what was actually, when we put the system under the biggest test that we were going to put it under, what is the event? Okay, this is the data that we need to know for next race. Well, we did it and we saw that post event testing numbers on your left side for your pull down and your external rotation dropped significantly, where right side held stronger, we've obviously got something to work on that left side.
Yeah. In events like Rottnest, where potentially you're swimming and breathing on the same side the whole time, we can see those variations between left and right. What I really like is how you are bringing the art of coaching, and you're looking at that body language. You're really getting that feedback from the athlete that's potentially nonverbal. But then bringing that science in and going, well, we need some objective measures. We need to be able to measure so we know how things are presenting.
And we also like in terms of like the asking them questions, I don't get them to fill out like a readiness score or anything like that because a lot of them really don't have a great understanding of it anyways. What we have done over the last couple of years is all my coaches and myself, we ask them the same questions every single time they walk in the door.
Yep.
How you feeling? Get an answer. And you can tell when someone's good and when someone's not when you've worked with them for more than 2 weeks by the way they answer that question back to you. They're either the same, they're ecstatic just by the way they respond, or it's like a ugh, and you go, okay, we've got something to investigate here. This person's a bit flat. You know, you've got how's the water feeling is the other one because that's the key one, like how you actually feel in the water. So, how's the water feeling? They'll give you a response like that. If it's the same old, that's okay. If it's a bit, oh, I feel absolutely buggered, like, you've got something to work on there. And if they come back and say, oh, I feel absolutely amazing, you've got something to work on there. And there's another couple of questions that we go through. So by asking those same questions all the time, we've got a very good trend of baseline that we know from these guys and where they're coming back at us on a sessionally basis.
So I'm interested. You gave us a bit of description around the range of motion measures and briefly touched on the strength. So when you're using the valve system and you're looking at force production, what sort of tests are you using pre and post?
So we'll go the post testing we would like to do with these guys and get them in as quickly as we can is internal and external rotation. That's lying down 90 degrees of the shoulder, just on the dynamo. How's that looking? We do an ASH test with them. So WT, Y, and I position press down on the dynamo as well. And then we've got a vertical pull. So it's just a lat pull down just to see how that's trending. If they have range of motion deficits, we don't do some of these tests. So like the ASH test and the pull down, if we have like overhead range issues, we're not going to those tests. We're just leaving them for now. We can retest that later once the ranges come back. And then a grip test, and there's a hip flexion and extension test that we do on the dynamo as well. Just to kind of give us a bit of a good range of what is going on there.
I'm interested. You mentioned shoulders, and a lot of the work you're just testing there is around the shoulders, and then the one around the hips. Are you seeing a lot of deficit in that hip flexion strength at the end, post race?
Yeah, the hip flexor one pops up quite often. It's also, we'll know that hip flexor one's going to come up negative because they'll just tell us that the hip flexors are cooked. I don't know, anyone who's had hip flexors that have been sore, about it and fatigued, about it. You're either feeling it in your back or you're feeling it in your hip flexor. It's pretty hard to bluff your way through that one. But when we put them into that hip extension, just the kick down, you'll see a deficit in that if they've got a lot of fatigue in that area.
When soreness isn't quite normal, what do you have around the athletes? What are the opportunities for them to then go and see other experts to assist with their recovery?
Yeah, so we don't have in-house physio or anything like that, and I'm definitely not a physio, so I'm not going to diagnose or anything like that. So if someone comes to us and they're like, we've got a pretty niggly shoulder here, it is not feeling great at all. It will be okay. Well, most of the time, these guys have someone that they're going to see, and we'll say, make sure you've got an appointment booked. A lot of the time, I'm telling people pre-event to just book one the week of anyway, just because we know these events are hard. They took a lot of strain out of the body, and especially for the first timers, I'm like, maybe you probably should have someone booked in for afterwards that you've seen before, just as a check-in. And if you cancel, you cancel. Like if you're good, you're good. You can cancel that and move on with your life, and that's okay. But you prefer to have one so you can get seen rather than be in the line of everyone else who's trying to get a physio appointment post event who may have a niggle. So that's the main thing that we'll do. We'll just refer them out to whoever is their preferred provider. If they don't have one, we have a few that we send them off to. But we like to keep that for the athlete to choose. In terms of like massage therapists or anything like that, again, I'm not a massage therapist. We'll find someone for them to go to if they don't have someone. Or a lot of the time, we just shove them in the compression boots and sleeves. Not to say that that's the same, but it does do a lot of good. Like a lot of the guys will be in the boots post in that first week out with the legs and the arms in the compression gear.
What sort of protocol do you use with the compression?
I put it on mode 2 and so we use I'll give them a plug. We use the recovery projects staff. So I just asked Pete what he'd recommend. So Pete's worked with guys at F1 level and high level football teams in the UK and stuff like that, purely on recovery. So he said, okay, post event, you probably want to go mode 2. We don't want to crank it up too high on the compression boots. Everyone's so fixated on just trying to max out the boots and get as much into it as possible. We like to stay around that 140 to 160 mark and then give it about 20 to 30 minutes on that. Mode 2 is on these boots is just a pressure from the feet, build, 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 and then it goes back out. That's all. That's the function of it, I guess.
If every Roto swimmer implemented one thing post race, what do you think it should be?
I really do think it would be a pre and post assessment would be what I would do. Just the amount of information that we can get when we measure you just like, within 6 weeks or something like that, and then just beforehand or just after is really quite valuable. However, that's generally very tricky to do, and not a lot of people are going to be able to do that for you. So, what's probably more practical is just the next day forcing yourself to do something. You just need to do something like go for a walk, go for a bike ride. It doesn't have to be swimming. Just do something, get the blood flow moving and start moving your body around and making sure that you're not in a just sitting around state. You want to get moving as quickly as possible and keep moving. Obviously, don't crush yourself. Don't go do a full workout, but just don't stay still for too long. Just try and keep moving and keep on top of that hydration because I think that's something that people just, after the first day, they just decide that they don't need it anymore. Keep topping that up the whole time. I know that's like 4 things, but it's pretty tricky to give you one.
Something I ask everyone when they come on is, what's your favorite swim set?
It's not my favorite swim set, but it's the set that I always use. I was a 200 breaststroker and we did some pretty crazy stuff back in the day. So we used to do a set of 9 400s of breaststroke. Okay. And it was descend 1 to 3, 4 to 6, and then 6 to 9. But you had to do it where number 4 had to be faster than number 1. That makes sense. So each time you descended, you had to be descending at a faster time, right? We did it as 9 2s as well. That was probably more realistic because that one you'd get down by the ninth one, you'd think that you would be absolutely crushed, and you were like it's the most exhausting thing I've ever done in my life. But the amount of flow that you would actually have, especially for a breaststroke, if you've ever swam breaststroke, you would understand that the flow is the hardest thing. And once you get that in a set and you can start really getting into it, you fly. It doesn't matter if you're diving or you're pushing. So we used to like end up getting super close to PB plays on that ninth one with no dive, no suit, no nothing, just because you just got that great rhythm going on.
We had a similar freestyle one this morning, but I like the idea that you're descending each group of 3 as well.
Yeah, I think it just keeps you locked into it, especially if you're doing something like 9 400s. The distance freestyle guys used to do that a lot that I used to train next to, that 9 4s, just descending that down. It
Yeah.
just really helps you get in that mindset of what you're going to do while you're swimming in those kind of really super distance events of like continuing that press.
My worst breaststroke one was our coach used to get us with a plastic chair in the pool and have to push that through the water.
Underwater,
Yeah, so it was frog kick basically.
kick underwater. Nice.
We had that one, and then the same thing. We'd have to hold the chair up above our head and do backstroke catch up with a chair.
Not gonna lie, the inventiveness of the regions are one of a kind. Like I do a lot of traveling at the moment to regional clubs and doing clinics and workshops and helping
Yeah,
develop the coaching teams around their swimming. And some of the stuff they come up with inspires me so much. They come up with the most inventive sets,
yeah.
the best way to engage the kids, and because they're out of the bubble. And I think that's really important to to continue to recognize as well. Like there's some fantastic things going on there, and we may laugh about it, but it probably worked at some
Yep.
level.
And that's why, like the work around what you're doing with the boots, I think that's really interesting, relating to those sorts of things and what pressure we use, and then how that, not so much from recovery, but how we might use it in a S&C perspective.
We use the BFR stuff a lot as well. It's very specific when we get it out, and very specific for who gets to use it. But
Yep.
we use, like, for example, for Andy to get him, because we couldn't get him any cold water immersion
Yep.
leading into his North Channel swim. Like it was just going to be impossible. So we had
Yeah.
him do an ice bath, like acclimatization protocol that I
Yep.
just freaking came up with, and that seemed to work. Was realistically just progressively overloading him in an ice bath over a course of 6 weeks leading in. Also, we would do first 4 sets of his pull-ups with no BFR on, and then the last 2 sets with it. And it seemed to him, I don't know if this actually does or not, but it simulated the feeling he would get in cold water was exactly the same. So I just went, well, maybe it's a blood flow. Like when you get the cold, it's a constriction, like maybe that's going to help. And he said, mate, it was so good because when we got over there and we did it, that feeling came on in the cold. I was like, oh, I'm used to doing freaking sets of 4 max pull-ups on these. It feels all right.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'm hoping to have a researcher come out in November from Uni of Portsmouth who has done a lot of cold water swimming type stuff. And to me, that sounds like a really good question.
It's just a question of, like, we've got a guy who lives in Australia who is about to swim in close to 14 to 8 degree water. How do we get anything close to that? So he can't live in Albany, and Albany was too hot anyway. Well, do you move to Fredbo for a couple of weeks and swim there? Because that's where the coldest water is in the
Yeah.
country. So it's like, well, there's no real logical options that we could go with apart from him camping in Ireland for 6 weeks was not feasible. So I was like, maybe this is the answer. We just, like, it's like, we're not going to, like, risk reward, right? We're like, well, it's not going to bust you up. So yeah, I'd
Um,
be interested to see if anyone else has tried it and had similar results to it. We've only ever done it with Andy because it's the only one we've ever needed to kind of figure that out for. He was quite lean at that point as well. That was before you kind of really got into that Ocean 7 stuff.
well, look, that might be another whole conversation around that sort of stuff.
Weird shit we've tried in the gym.
Yeah, oh, definitely. Because I think that sometimes it's like that's where the coaches they come up with the ideas. The scientists then go and measure it and say, yeah, this is why it works or this is why it doesn't.
Anyway,
So my last opportunity really is for you to share anything that we haven't spoken about today that you might want to share about strength and conditioning, and more particular around the swimming and post event.
yeah, okay. So my number one thing for most people is, and this is what I present on a lot, is, strength training for swimming. There is a lot of stuff on the internet there that is very bad. There's not a lot of very good stuff. There is a few, but the main thing is just don't get caught down the rabbit hole of trying to mimic your swimming actions in the gym, because you end up in a bit of a pickle. You want to first keep it as simple as this. You want to make sure that you have adequate range of motion. You want to make sure you can stabilize, and then you got to make sure that you can produce force. None of that requires you to do swimming specific movements. All that requires you to do is make sure you can get your arm above your head. You can rotate effectively, main two ones. If you get those two right, you're going to be pretty good. And then being able to stabilize in a head position, stabilize your trunk. So core, but that is rib cage and pelvis staying in alignment. And then making sure you have some leg development in there. So it's a full body workout. Don't get too over the top on, I need to be able to do a pull up at maximum. And then really making sure that you actually lift some weight and push some weight through. You do need to get stronger. It is the easiest way for you guys, for even endurance swimmers. We've seen more benefit out of the endurance guys than the sprint guys a lot of the time, to get better, because it increases your ability to go faster, increases your ability to maintain force production throughout the entirety of your swim. So when everyone else is getting to, like, the 10K mark, the 12K mark, 19K mark, and they are absolutely gassed and their shoulders are falling apart and their technique's gone to poo, you're still able to hold your technique and get across the line. So just really make sure you're trying to keep it as simple as possible, and you're not chasing swim specific work, because your most specific thing that you're ever going to do is your time in the water anyway.
Well, thank you, Ryan. I really appreciate your time. I love the way you finished that today. I think that certainly leads into future conversations where we might be able to talk about strength and conditioning leading into events and how we might implement that into our training more specifically. I really enjoyed the conversation around what swimmers should consider post race, post big events to ensure that they recover effectively.
Yeah, mate, thanks for having me on. I think it's great. More time,
Beautiful.
opportunities to talk about swimming and strength conditioning is the better.
Ryan, thank you again for your time, for sharing such practical insights into what is often a neglected phase of performance. If you've recently completed a major swim, here's the simple takeaway: rehydrate gradually, get a real meal in, prioritize sleep quality, keep the body moving gently. Recovery isn't the end of the process, it's part of the performance plan. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with a training partner, your coach, or someone preparing for the next big swim. It helps the podcast reach more swimmers who can benefit from these conversations. You'll find the links to Ryan's work in the show notes. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the water.